Hello again, Thish Gaming here with part 3 of my WoW Classic Phase 6.5, aka the pre-patch discussion. Today we're going to be doing a class review of Rogue, Shaman, Warlock, Warrior, covering specs that you can use at 60 and any systematic changes that occurred which can alter how you play or gear. So let's get into it. First off is the Rogue, and when we get to the Talon tree you'll see almost nothing has changed for Rogue. They are fundamentally the exact same class. In fact, the biggest change for Rogue is more a change to the systems around them. And this is the fact that they no longer get weapon skill, they instead get 10 expertise, or 2.5% chance less to be dodged and parried, for free in their Talons. So, what does this all mean? Well, it's kind of a wash. They should still be really good, still be really high DPS. They have 4% less white hit damage, but they're 2.5% less chance to be dodged, potentially higher. I think it's going to be a wash. They'll still be really good, solid DPS, and could be that with all of these new buffs that are coming in, they get even better. Time will tell. So, as you can see, Rogue Talons. This should look very familiar to all rogues. It's pretty much the same spec. Now, you do have the new Talons, Combat Potency. This will increase up to 100% chance, or a 20% chance to generate 15 energy, or Surprise Attacks, which is, as you can see, finishing moves can't be dodged, and increases your builder moves by 10%. These are both good, but most of the rogues I've talked to have said that Lethality, 30% increased critical strike damage bonus, Relentless Strikes, they're more useful than these. So this will probably be the rogue spec of choice. Now with the changes to warriors, this means that you are the big cooldown class. So that's a new niche that you have, and really I think rogues are going to put up some impressive numbers on bosses, but as far as spec changes, pretty much the same. Elemental Shaman. So as far as just flat out buffs, they have gotten some of the best ones. Just from their talents, they're going to be getting 3% additional hit and a totem which will give their entire party 3% spell hit and 3% spell crit, making them the best caster buffing class in the game. And you might be thinking, wait, getting 3% hit from talents, then they already get that? No, they get 6%. Just at level 60 they don't have the talents to get that 6% and the 3% in the resto tree. So you could just say that they have 3% higher hit from talents. Now, they also get a rework of clear casting and a new mana sustain talent, both of which should alleviate some of their more pressing mana issues, and they get lightning overload, and lightning overload is just free damage. Just 20% chance to have a second lightning bolt that deals half damage and deals no threat. It's literally free damage, and it doesn't even cause problems with spiking on threat. So overall, just their throughput's buffed, their mana's buffed, their utility is buffed. Elemental Shamans are all around just a better class, and if you have one in your raid, every caster DPS is going to want to be in their group. Here we can see an Elemental Shaman talent build, and there are some points you can move around. You can put more in Reverberation, take things out of Elemental Warding, or put things in Call of Flame. This is just a good standard talent tree though, which will serve you well, and really you're getting some passive damage increases and passive stats, and you're getting some really good active utility. So overall, really large buffs to the class. I think it's going to be far more desired, and you should look forward to casters trying to be your best friend and bribing the raid leader to be in your group. So yeah, you have that. Enhancement Shaman. So this might be the most improved class. Boomkin is in contention for the most improved class, but Boomkin had some stuff that they could get away with decursing and kind of being flexible. Enhancement Shaman really didn't bring anything that a Resto Shaman with enhanced totems couldn't do as well, or even couldn't do even better. So Enhancement Shamans see perhaps the largest amount of changes in the pre-patch. For one, they ditched that useless, awful talent that is a point just to be able to use two-handed maces and axes, and instead they swap over to using one-handed weapons and dual wielding, and they get 6% hit in their talent tree for free, which means if you have a boomkin plus their hit talents, they're already hit capped on against bosses with absolutely no hit from their gear. That's awesome. That's a huge boost to the class. Now, additionally, they had two other problems, which was that they were a bit mad or multi-attribute dependent if you're a D&D nerd, in that they wanted spell power, they wanted mana, they wanted intellect for a mana pool, all kinds of stats that didn't all come together on their gear and left them feeling a bit scattered. So now they get spell power from their attack power. So just stacking strength gives their spells more oomph, and they also get two new talents, one that reduces the cost of shocks, and one is a cooldown, which can basically fill up their mana bar to alleviate their two primary issues. And they have a unique deep enhanced talent, which is whenever they crit, they buff the AP of the group they're in by 10% for 10 seconds. And elemental shamans or enhancement shamans are going to crit constantly, way more often than every 10 seconds. So basically see this as a permanent 10% AP boost in any group they're in. I can't really understate the value of essentially 1,000 AP to your melee DPS group. Like, they are essentially a world buff on a stick, and they are so much better than any of the consumables that used to exist. So I think that you're going to want enhanced shamans, and you're going to want an enhanced shaman for every melee DPS group you can get. The more the merrier. I would say that as far as like the speed running meta, they might not be quite as good, just for the fact that they need to spend their mana to deal damage, unlike a resto shaman who only needs to heal for damage that's taken. And if you don't take any, they don't spend mana, aka the warriors and rogues can just keep rolling until the healers are in. So it might not be a speedrun stat, but for a damage and raid damage thing, I think you're going to want a lot of enhancement shamans in the pre-patch meta. Enhanced shaman. Now, this will look very different to any enhanced shaman, and a huge sigh of relief that you're not putting a points into getting parry and two-handed weapons, which is just ridiculous. Now, you are getting spell power to attack power, this talent, Unleash Rage, which is I mentioned the 10% bonus AP to all your party members within 20 yards. Huge, 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 huge buff. Shamanistic Rage, 2 minutes to basically get a full mana bar. Also really good. So why are we in here? These points are kind of flexible. You could put them wherever you wanted. If you wanted lower cost healing spells and reincarnation times, great. I wouldn't change any of the points in here at all. Maybe you could put Ghost Wolf and the Guardian Totems, but that's really it. When you are 70, just a word of warning, you don't go Elemental. You go into Restoration for the reduced totem cost and Nature's Guidance. It's just too good to pass up. And I will discuss that more, and if we get into a TBC video, I'll discuss why you go into Restoration and not Elemental. But just know that when you are in Classic, this is the spec you want to be going. Potentially you could stay two-handed, but you really should be trying to angle for some one-handed weapons now, so that when the time comes, and if you are the person who gets to swap over to Enhance, then you can be ready. And the last of the shamans, Restoration. Now, unlike Ellie, who got massive buffs, and Enhancement, who got the mini rework, Resto is pretty much the same. Now, they do get a new healing spell, Earth Shield. Their first proactive heal, that you can apply this to a target, and it will heal when they take damage, which is fantastic, especially when you can predict that you know someone will be taking damage, like the tank, or a mage who's going to be doing AoE, or especially like AQ40, the Warlock tanks, really good on them. So, great spell, gives you a bit more flexibility, proactive gameplay, but otherwise you're just getting more healing power, more spell power, and 20% boost to your chain heal. That's the extent of the talents. They're good talents and make you better at the things you were already good at. In addition, as a bit of a side change, the spell damage changes, where now you get about 33% of your healing power spell damage on all gear, is really good for shamans. I'm sure you have shamans doing, frost shocks, chain lightning, or not chain lightnings, lightning bolts. Don't have them do chain lightnings on KT phase 1. Well, now they do a lot more damage. Your LE shamans will be the kings of this, of course, but your resto shamans can actually do a decent amount of burst damage from range, which, if there's nothing to heal, then they're a great choice to, contribute to the damage. So overall, they're pretty much the same. You take them for the same reasons. You want a lot of them because of totems. You want a lot of them because chain heal is busted. But otherwise, I wouldn't expect a revolution in how they're played. And Resto Shaman. As you can see, this looks very similar. And I've left 5 points out, which you can really just put wherever you want. I trust you. You'll figure it out. Your new stuff is 30% of your intellect is healing and spell damage, 20% more chain healing, and a new heal spell. Pretty simple. These are all really good throughput boosters. So, more throughput, otherwise, same class. Now, Warlocks. They see a large systematic buff from the debuff limit being raised. That's a big change. You can actually use your spells. Now, if you were in a raid without a lot of Warlocks, it wouldn't affect you that much. But there's some other smaller changes. Affliction gets a buff to Curse of Elements, and they have a debuff, which, when they apply a dot, they make a target deal 5% less physical damage. Really, really good on bosses. You generally will want this on a raid boss, such as Saffron, who hits hard, or any boss where the tank is potentially random, like Kel'Thuzad. So it's a very good spec, and you will generally want at least one Affliction. Destruction, also good. They get a new spell, Shadow Fury. I'll be talking about that more when I cover their spec, but it's a really high utility spell and gives something that Warlocks didn't have, which was ranged AoE burst. That should allow you to much more be able to compete with mages on those big burst AoE packs that are common in Naxxramas. And lastly, this is more of a change from how you've played Classic so far. Demonic Sacrifice probably won't be taken in the pre-patch. You just don't have the points to be able to get that multiplicative scaling, and it's much better to either go for the Deep Destro or the Affliction scaling and grab other good talents. I'll cover this more when we get into the talent trees. So this is the first of the Warlock specs I want to talk about, which is Deep Affliction. And the reason why you go Deep Affliction is for Malediction, which is 3% additional damage bonus on your Curse of Elements. It's good. Now, you make some sacrifices for this spec, but I think this is the spec that you go if you are the person that's just now gearing up a Warlock to take into TBC. You volunteer to go this spec. You say, hey, I'll go Affliction. You get 10% hit for free on your Affliction spells. You're providing a very useful tank damage reduction buff, and you're buffing all of the mages. So you'll have a spot, you'll be useful, you have some utility, and you have a justification for why your damage is low, but you're also more gear independent, so you can still do a good job. But moving on, this is another spec which all Warlocks should be familiar with, the SLSL spec, Shadow Mastery SM Ruin spec. And this should also be really good. Now, the points here are flexible. If you have someone doing Shadow Embrace, you don't need to take it. You can put points in Empowered Corruption and wherever else you need them. This is pretty straightforward. You could swap out Intensity for Improved Searing Pain or Cataclysm, but in general, the big things is to get Ruin and to get Shadow Mastery. So if you want to go this spec, see if anyone else is covering Shadow Embrace, and if not, then maybe see about getting an Affliction lock in your raid. Otherwise, you're providing, 80% of the benefit of it, so it's still pretty good. But this is, I think, the spec for a pumper Warlock in the pre-patch. And you might notice there's 5 free points. You can put them wherever you want. Hit chance, improved life tap, improved drain soul, demonic embrace, wherever. The big thing that you're getting here is Shadow and Flame, which is Shadow Bolt gains an additional 20% of your bonus spell damage. This is why you can get away with not having a Succubus sacrificed. Overall, you're going to lose a little bit of damage, but not enough damage is lost from losing the Succubus to make up for the fact that you're getting 3% crit and an entirely new spell, which is super useful. Shadow Fury. 30-yard range, 20-second cooldown, deal 600 to 700 damage to all enemies within 8 yards and stun them for 2 seconds. This is incredible. If you can't think of like 10 to 15 pulls that this isn't a great spell that will increase your damage a ton in Naxxramas, then you aren't thinking hard enough. This is fantastic, and we'll probably see all Warlocks rise on the total damage dealt across instances meters, which, if you're not aware, that's a really important meter as well, not just the boss ratings. So overall, big increase to Warlock's usefulness, and overall, your single target damage isn't going to suffer that much. In fact, because you're getting now 10% threat reduction from Destructive Reach, your cap is that much higher. And especially if you're Horde and you can get a Paladin in your raid for Salvation, oh my god, you're going to be doing so much more damage just from the fact that you have a higher cap. So this is, I think, the Pumper Warlock spec. I would recommend I'm Alive TV if you want to see a more in-depth discussion of Warlock builds, but otherwise, I think this will suit you just fine. And Warriors. Warriors. I'm sure you've heard that they are going to be not good in level 70 content, or at least not good to the same degree that they're good now. But I think they're still going to be good, and considering that you probably have a lot of them, you're still going to be running Warriors, and they're still going to be topping meters as long as world buffs exist. Now, what I'm going to show here is the way that Rage is changing. So beforehand, Rage functioned as just a very simple formula. How much damage you dealt divided by 203 times 7.5 equals the amount of Rage. So essentially, I think it's 500 damage will give you like 18 to 20 Rage. Now, this is changing in the pre-patch, and if we get patch 2.0.10, the numbers that I have on screen are correct. If we get patch 2.0.01, which I don't think we will, I think we'll get the 2.43, but just in case, the numbers that I'm showing here are 2.0.10. This will change how Rage is generated based off of your attacks. And the long story short is that daggers get much worse. Much, by much, I mean 10 to 20% worse. One-handed weapons get worse rage generation in your offhand unless you are critting. And main hand, one-handed weapons get slightly better. Crits get better. And especially two-handed weapons get substantially better. So that's the general gist of it. Your offhand weapons get worse, especially your offhand normal hits. Daggers get worse. Everything else is slightly better. I think the overall impact to this is that because you're relying on your main hand to generate more rage and you can't rely on your offhand, we'll see a little bit less heroic strike queuing. But with how absurd crit values get with world buffs, I think that overall it's not going to be a huge nerf. Now, once we lose world buffs and you're level 70, you'll feel these much more intensely, and you should be prepared for the fact that at level 70 you'll have less rage. But for now, I think that you will generally be alright. Now that we've addressed the systems, let's actually talk about the changes to the classes. So a big one is Death Wish and Sweeping Strikes are switching places. So Fury Warriors are not going to have Death Wish, and instead will have Sweeping Strikes. And Arms Warriors, which we'll get to that, will have Death Wish. So Arms, you will want at least one Arms in your raid, and the reason being is that they have a new debuff that increases the physical damage taken by 4%. 4% increased damage to every physical damage dealer in your raid. Huge. You're going to need an Arms Warrior. Fury, on the other hand, isn't going to have the points to get Impale plus their new talents, and is going to have Sweeping Strikes rather than Death Wish. So I think they'll still be good. I think the spikes, the popping all the trinkets and Death Wish spikes are going to be lower, but Sweeping Strikes only has a 30-second cooldown. It can be up almost every pull, so cleave pulls are going to be much, much higher damage from your Fury Warriors, which should overall probably see them dealing more overall damage, but being less of a pushing out thousands of damage on bosses kind of spec. So now we finished discussing rage generation and how that will impact warriors. Let's get into the specs. First off, arms. And you're taking arms for Blood Frenzy. Rend and Deep Wounds abilities also increase all melee damage caused to the target by 4%. Now, I think this is physical damage, and it's just a typo here. So I'm going to presume it's a typo, and it's just 4% physical damage to the boss as soon as they have a Deep Wounds on them. Otherwise, it's a passive. You get slightly better Mortal Strikes, but you're the one with Death Wish, and you only have a 20-minute cooldown and a longer Reckoning, so potentially this is the spec to really crush a boss parse, especially if you get lucky and you get a lot of sword spec procs, which FYI, sword spec is the best spec you can go, but if you are an orc and you have a really good axe and you don't have a good sword, you can still go poleaxe specialization. The extra expertise will basically, in item levels, will basically account for the sword specialization being slightly better. Otherwise, you have 2 additional points you can spend however you want. Really, it can go anywhere. I wouldn't take points out of Tactical Mastery, and I would keep Cruelty as just being a solid damage boost. So that basically covers your Arms Warrior, who you want one of. Now, Fury Warriors. Fury Warriors are fairly unchanged as well. You're going to lose Anger Management, Deep Wounds, and Impale in order to get your new talents, which is a 10% attack power boost with 10% threat reduction, and a activated ability that will give you a ton more attack power. So I think you might have a higher chugging along rate with this spec as far as the APS goes, but without Death Wish you can't really do the big Death Wish, Blood Fury, Burst, Crit, Execute phase. But overall, across all trash, should be way better. And you get several talents like Weapon Mastery that make your damage more consistent, Improved Whirlwind to get it, more frequent whirlwinds equals more frequent damage, and I think this makes it so these line up better. I would have to double check, but I have to imagine that it might be that these are easier to coordinate in a rotation. Now, if you notice, this is 3 points short, so you can go wherever you need these 2 points. If you need the hit, put it in hit. Otherwise, you can go with Improved Execute or Improved Berserker Rage, Piercing Howl. If you are this spec, you might get asked to do Improved Demo, which, if you don't know, Improved Demo is really good, and you may be asked to, as a Fury Warrior, be the person providing Improved Demoralizing Shroud, especially if you're a newer or lesser geared Fury Warrior. I have to tell you, Unbridled Wrath is not as good as most people think it is. 1 additional rage point is good, but it's not going to be make or break. This might make or break an attempt, which is why it's worth taking in the raid. So overall, boss damage might go down slightly, but your trash damage should be being much higher. 30 rage, 30-second cooldown, your melee weapon swing strike an additional nearby opponent. Huge boost to cleave damage. You will get to experience what rogues experience, except your Blade Fury is only on a 30-second cooldown. And lastly, Protection and Fury Prot warriors. So this is actually what I have the most questions on. I have very little experience actually playing with a Protection warrior in Classic and how much threat they generate. And as far as Fury Prot, I have a really big question with the new Tactical Mastery and what exactly that does to Bloodthirst threat. Now, if it does multiply Bloodthirst threat and you can take Defiance, then maybe Fury Prot stays the pumper, don't worry about boss damage, max DPS tank, and then you have a deep protection tank for the bosses that hit really hard, a la Saffron or Thaddeus or those sorts. This really remains to be seen. I think when I make my recommendations, I'm going to recommend having a Fury Prot, a Deep Prot, and a Bear in your raid, so that you can kind of A/B test which one does what well and which ones don't do things well. Generally speaking, all warriors are going to be a bit better at tanking. Specifically, the DPS warriors are going to be a bit better at tanking. So having, 2 tanks and then having warriors step in to be 3-4 is going to be less painful after the patch. So I guess we'll just have to see. This is my biggest question mark of the new meta. Fury Prot. The Classic specific spec that really defines the tanking meta. So I think this is the spec you'll go, and there are 5 points left, whether you want to reduce dodge, get improved heroic strikes, chance to increase your chance to hit. A lot of options here. Really, like as I mentioned, this comes down to greatly increases the threat generated by your Bloodthirst when you're in defensive stance. That plus Defiance. Do these stack? Do they multiply off each other? Can you get some insane threat Bloodthirsts and really just push the threat ceiling to a new level? Or is it not worth it and Shield Slam and Devastate are just better? Really, it's going to take testing in order to understand this. Which, speaking of Shield Slam and Devastate, here's what you're probably going to get out of your Protection Warrior. Now, I'm speccing this deep mitigation, so it has every mitigation talent. You could potentially pull points out of mitigation or out of damage to get things in these trees. Just remember, you can go 10 points and still have Devastate. So you could potentially get improved Thunderclap, improved Demo, Cruelty, Booming Voice. All these are options that you can get while still having Devastate. Now, Devastate is interesting. Now, you can't do this when a rogue has an improved exposed armor, so it loses a lot of value then. But if you tell the rogues that they don't have to improve exposed armor, they might be okay with it. It's probably worth testing to see how good this actually is, and otherwise you get 10% total strength and 5% total stam. So just a nice passive boost, but I think overall the most compelling talent change that you get is Focus Rage. Reduce the rage cost of all offensive abilities by 3. This means that even though you have a shield, even though that you are trying to not generate rage but using Heroic Strike with your main hand, you can get further on less rage, and really this is what really sets the build. So you have 12 rage, this reduces it by 3, this reduces it by 3. Now you have an attack that only costs 6 rage and can put up a lot of threat. So this is, like I said, a question mark. Will this be good? Do you want this on big, hard-hitting bosses? Do you prefer it over Druid? Do you not? A lot of questions. So, like I said, I'll get to this in the class balance overview and raid composition overview, but I have to imagine that it's at least worth trying. So, that covers all of the new specs and classes for the WoW Classic Phase 6.5 pre-patch, and I'm interested to hear what you guys have to think. Am I incorrect? Correct? Did I miss something? or did I remind you of something that you had forgotten? Either way, in my next video, I'm going to be covering Horde, Alliance, and then the crazy people who managed to boost the new classes for their faction, raid comps, and how I expect them to be built and what kind of synergies we want to try and build into them. So look forward to that. Thanks. Bye.